Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome. This is a Spy X Family one-shot. Credit goes to Raeindeer.
Today was one of the rare days where neither of them were required at work by their respective agencies. With Anya off shopping with a friend from school, it's just them in the house today. Although it wasn't their first time alone together, it still didn't feel completely normal. Due to them no longer needing to keep the married couple's persona on, they didn't quite know how to portray themselves to each other. The two still had their secrets and masks they wore, things they hid from everyone, even close family. However, with nobody else to view them, one of the facades they wore fell off. Loid knew he shouldn't indulge himself, however, he couldn't ignore how happy this role and guise made him. Wasn't able to stop the real emotions from leaking into the persona he had created for this mission. Loid Forger was slowly being more and more like his real self that he thought he had locked away. Yor was struggling with the idea that for an agreement she had accepted for selfish reasons, she actually felt like she belonged and was happy. For the first time, an act she put on suddenly evolved into something more. Something closer to her heart that she wants to cherish, to keep. Today, it seems that they would both finally take a step in the direction towards understanding themselves and each other in quite a hazardous way. Loid, I've been meaning to ask you for a while, but please teach me how to cook. Yor loudly exclaims out of the blue during breakfast. Choking mid-sip, Loid almost spits out his coffee. Seeing that Loid still had not said anything, Yor lowers her head facing down on the table, eyes facing downwards and wandering towards her breakfast. Please teach me how to cook. I know I've already taken lessons, but I feel that you teaching me would also prove to be more effective in me learning how to better myself as a person. She pleads again. Due to all of Loid's talks about how she was already a great wife and mother, her self-doubt had lessened, although not completely vanished. However, her request for Loid wasn't so she could fill in a role better, but so she could feel more capable as a person. Frankly, she was tired of people fainting the moment they tasted her food. She also didn't think the way that Yuri ate her food could be considered healthy. Meanwhile, Loid's mind was completely frozen. When usually he would have started going through scenarios at least 100 kilometers an hour, it had just stopped working. The longer it takes for him to deliver an answer, the more his mood dampens and a sense of foreboding starts to wash over his body. It wasn't that he didn't want to spend time with Yor. He just didn't want to spend time with her while in the kitchen. As a teacher and instructor out of all things, even he might not be able to ensure the food Yor creates ends up as edible. All his survival instincts that he had honed over the years were screaming at him to find an excuse and not put himself through having to be in the vicinity as Yor cooks. He'd never even see her cook, only the results of her efforts. Naturally, Loid had planned for this scenario to occur. But all the responses he thought of at the time were becoming less and less likely to come out his mouth the longer he spent looking at how determined Yor's figure looks in front of him. He feels that he should feel irritation or disappointment at these thoughts that were coursing through this mind. Maybe even start trying to justify them with the excuse of, for the mission. But he couldn't even bring himself to do that. At some point, he had stopped fighting it. As long as what he was feeling aligned with his mission, he couldn't really say it was a hindrance. The hardened Twilight version of himself in his mind argues there are many ways this new development hinders him, but he pointedly ignores it. Yor's feelings and interests were aligned to his mission and his own personal care towards her. It was a net positive outcome. Care, he didn't think he had cared for someone in, he didn't even know how long. Oh, how far he had fallen as a spy. His enemies would gawk in disbelief if they saw this as how emotion-filled Twilight has become. Loid? Is something the matter? Yor's voice brings him out of his internal struggle. She had sat upright again and was now leaning towards him, concern written all over her face. Internally, she was panicking over if she had been too forward. Maybe she had stepped over a boundary and popped the bubble they had forged together. "Sorry if I was asking too much from you given our arrangement, I just thought," Yor expresses, panic fully rearing its head in her voice. But before she's able to continue, she's interrupted by Loid's words, which brings back her excitement and hope from before. "No, it's fine, I'll teach you how to cook. I was just distracted by how delicious this coffee you made for me was." "Did you add something different?" he responds, having blurted out the first thing he thought of as he saw Yor starting to panic. It wasn't entirely a lie, the coffee today somehow tasted worse than the one she made yesterday. His stomach hurt a little. "I can't thank you enough for agreeing." "Oh yes. The coffee, I'm glad you noticed. This morning I added a lot more hot water because I thought it could make the taste come out more. I also accidentally added salt instead of sugar in, and I think the milk was slightly expired, but I'm glad you still like it." Quote. Yor rambles on about all the other improvements she made to the coffee, and with each word the pain in Loid's stomach increases. "So, what do you want to learn how to make?" Loid questions when they get to the kitchen, both of them standing there a bit awkwardly. "Well, I've always wanted to learn how to make a proper meal involving fish, but I'm not sure what there is," Yor replies, thinking back to all the fish heads and tails she's haphazardly thrown in pots and cooked. She was determined to make something that wouldn't end in Loid or Anya passing out on the floor. Loid shudders as he is also reminded about the first few times he ate Yor's cooking. There are many things he can face without fear: bomb threats, a gun to his head or a knife to the throat, but Yor's cooking when it isn't something she's practiced relentlessly to try make edible. The thought makes his whole body tingle with fear. "Let's see what we can make with what we have. I don't think going out for another grocery run when we went shopping yesterday would be practical," Loid suggests while looking through their pantry and fridge. He needs to think of a recipe which wouldn't involve cutting anything precisely, or wouldn't mind the fish and other ingredients to be absolutely obliterated by Yor's chopping skills. The idea of making fish cakes comes to mind. He's made them a few times. They taste quite nice and are easy to make, but he doubts they had a packet of panko breadcrumbs lying around. Or any type of breadcrumbs. They could make homemade ones, but that was another problem in itself. While he dismisses the idea, he suddenly remembers what happened at the supermarket yesterday. The day before, Loid had overheard the neighbors whispering about how they had never seen the Forger family go out shopping together, and they wondered if they were as close as they displayed themselves as. So, like the mission-oriented spy he is, immediately planned for a family shopping session to dispel the rumors, as well posing as an opportunity for their family to become closer. "We're going on a family shopping trip today," Loid states the moment Anya and Yor were both in the living room. "Family shopping trip. Can we buy more peanuts, please, please, please?" Anya says, looking at her parents pleadingly. "Well, we are running out, so I suppose we should get some more. You did well on the recent test." Yor comments. A look of contemplation spreads over her face, most likely thinking about what things they need to buy as well. "Let's just go and buy whatever we need since we haven't gone shopping in a while as well," Loid says, picking up his jacket. The moment they're about to close the door, Bond comes rushing out, clearly wanting to join. Knowing a losing battle when he sees one as Loid looks at Anya and Bond's faces, he goes back inside the house to collect a leash and they set off. The shopping trip had been fairly normal overall. Well, what you would count as normal for the Forger family at least. Anya and Bond had only run off once since they entered the store, having dashed towards the peanut aisle. Yor only accidentally smashed a single bag's worth of tomatoes, and they've only bought 3 non-essential items that Anya had begged them for. 2 of those times was because Loid was worried the customers would report him to the SSS, and one of the times was because Yor also wanted to buy it. He didn't understand their infatuation with stuffed toys. The only moment he would count as strange occurred near the end of the shopping trip. They were walking past the Asian food aisle when Bond suddenly stopped in his tracks and started tugging his leash to walk towards the Asian food aisle. Is something the matter? Anya questions, noticing that he had stopped walking. Following his line of sight towards the area with all the packet things with the word breadcrumbs on them. Not recognizing the food item, Anya reads Bond's mind to try and understand why he wants to buy them. She sees a vision of Papa being disappointed and thinking about the panko breadcrumbs things. Then the scene changes to Papa and her on the floor again as Mama cries over another fish stew. Anya didn't really understand, but all she knew was they needed to buy those breadcrumb thingies. Anything to not have to eat the disgusting mangled fish stew Mama makes. Papa. Mama. I want to buy the Fanco breadcrumbs. Please, please, it's important. She says, struggling with the pronunciation a bit. Confused, Loid and Yor turn around and they're about to say no because this is the fourth item they don't need but bought because of Anya. But the moment they look at the passion on her face and the fire in her eyes, they realize she's as determined to buy the breadcrumbs as she is with buying peanuts. Loid spends a few seconds mourning over how little he understands children, then takes a packet and throws it in their already overflowing trolley without a comment. Yor also decides not to question it, it wasn't worth the energy or confusion. Opting to take Bond's lead from Anya and walking towards the checkout. Sometimes Loid really did wonder if Anya or Bond had superpowers of sorts, they really could plan for anything even if it wasn't intentional. Making a mental note to thank her for this, he scours the back of the pantry to find where he placed the breadcrumbs packet. Grabbing them he turns to Yor who was giving the new knives they bought some interesting looks. How about we make fish cakes? We just happen to have all the ingredients, Loid suggests. Fish cakes? She asks confused, imagining a cake with fish stuffed inside. She couldn't see a world where that tastes good. It's like a fried fish mixed with potato, it's simple to make and I think you would like it. He replies, moving towards the fridge to get all the ingredients out. Well, you know best, so let's do it. Yor enthusiastically replies, this is a great opportunity for her to be an even better wife. We can start in 20 minutes, I need to boil some potatoes in advance before we can start, Loid says, going over the recipe in his mind to see if there's anything else he would need to prepare in advance. Nodding, Yor takes something out of her purse and approaches Loid while he's taking some potatoes and placing them in a pot. Here's something I picked up in the market this morning after I had taken Anya to the shopping center to meet up with her friend. It's a few pastries I think you would like, as a thank you for agreeing to teach me how to cook. Yor explains as she places the pastries on the kitchen counter. I'll leave them here, then you can eat them whenever you want after we're finished. Pausing what he was doing, Loid stares at the brown bag the pastries were in then at Yor. Thank you, Yor. You didn't need to but I appreciate it, Loid says and he really means it. He didn't know how long it had been since someone had given him a gift out of genuine appreciation. No underlying motives, no means to poison or kill him, not even to gain his favor. Just a simple, thank you. It felt foreign but not unwanted. Taking Loid's silence as a dismissal, Yor moves to the living room to clean up some of Anya's toys and gives him space in the kitchen to prepare everything he needs to. After staring at the pastry bag for a few more seconds, he moves them to a tiny bench in the kitchen so they wouldn't get jumbled up in all the ingredients that were about to be placed on the counter later. He finally starts boiling the potatoes. The now cooked and peeled potatoes on the kitchen counter. Loid decided against letting Yor peel the potatoes, considering what happened the last time he walked in on her trying to use a peeler. He calls Yor over and he instructs her to collect some of the ingredients. Then starts to give her instructions. For this recipe the things we need to prepare include cooked fish, which we will do after we've prepared the rest of the ingredients. Cooked potatoes, which I have already dealt with, grated cheese, crushed garlic, and finely chopped chives. Loid says quite quickly. After he finishes the list of things they need to prepare, he wonders if he said it too quickly for Yor to remember everything and was preparing to repeat it. However, looking towards her he sees her nodding along with a notebook in hand. Seemingly having written everything down. What should we start with? She asks, staring at all the ingredients and utensils on the counter. Well, seeing that this is meant to be me teaching you how to cook, I don't think we should split jobs like I normally would. Do you know how to use a grater? Loid replies, trying to scope out what Yor knows how to use in the kitchen. Well, when I need things shredded I just chop them very finely, but I've seen people use them so it can't be too hard. Yor states, trying to imagine herself using it. It did seem quite simple. Loid, on the other hand, was thinking of all the ways her using a grater could go wrong. Her grating it too fast and accidentally grating her fingers as well. The grater not being able to withstand her strength and breaking, resulting in them needing to chop the cheese instead. There were so many ways it could go wrong. But she eventually had to learn how to use one. He could stop her before she injured herself. Most likely. How about I guide your hands while grating it until you get used to the motion? Loid suggests. He decides not to think about how it meant they would be in very close proximity to her. He was Twilight, he's romanced many women, a bit of closeness and physical contact shouldn't distress him this much. Yor, also realizing what this meant, went a little red, but convinced herself it would be good training for when they need to pretend to be a married couple. Couples don't react strongly when they only touch after all. Sure. That sounds most effective, she says with a smile, pushing the blush and inner turmoil away. They were a bit stiff while getting into position, but eventually they figured it out. With Yor holding the grater in one hand and block of cheese in another. Loid behind her with his hands on hers, slowly guiding her hands to grate the cheese and stopping her from applying too much pressure. Loid couldn't help but feel how many calluses Yor had on her hands. He wonders how she got all of them. Most likely due to manual labor from trying to earn money to raise her brother when she was younger. Why was he even thinking about this? He wasn't in a position to pry. He wasn't her real husband, only on paper. Shaking his head, he focuses back on the task at hand. Yep, that's how you do it. Do you think you could do it on your own? He questions as he's about to remove his hands. I think I understand how to do it now, she replies with a smile, proud at herself for learning a new skill. Hearing the confirmation, he removes his hands. In an instant the cheese is grated. Loid's pretty sure it was done in record speed, but he doesn't linger on it. It was Yor after all. Crushing the garlic went as expected. Yor had almost crushed the garlic into the counter and broken the knife due to how much pressure and strength she was using. Surprisingly, chopping the chives went perfectly. She had controlled her strength enough not to cut through the board, and they were chopped as finely as humanly possible. It seems that she's learned from her past mistakes. Now to get the fish ready. Since the fish we bought was already cut up, all we need to do is fry it in the pan. Loid says as he takes a pan out and places it on the already turned on stove. You can pour the oil on, but only a little bit, also beware of it splattering around. I don't want you to get injured, he continues, beckoning Yor over to take hold of the pan and handing her the bottle of oil. Remember, don't use a lot, just a little amount, like this. Quote. Yor instantly tipped the whole oil bottle in her hand upside down onto the pan while staring Loid straight in the eye with a puzzled look. The next second happened in a flash. The large amount of oil that had fallen out of the bottle instantly sizzled and started splattering everywhere. At the same time, Loid had grabbed the oil bottle from Yor's hand and moved them far enough from the pan that they weren't severely burned by the oil. Despite foreseeing this happening, Loid was not quick enough to prevent Yor of all injury. She had still gotten some stray oil droplets sprayed onto her hand. The area affected on her hand was completely red. Thankfully, it wasn't too severe. It didn't look like it had melted through a lot of skin. They could just run it under some cold water, then bandage it up. But Loid really was reconsidering the decision to teach Yor a recipe that involved quite a lot of oil. I'm sorry. I should have waited for you to continue. I thought that it would need a lot of oil to fully cook it, she apologizes, clearly not giving the burn on her hand any thought, worrying more about how she had failed to follow instructions. No, it's okay. I should have given clearer instructions. Never mind that. Let's get that cooled down with some cold water, then bandaged up. Loid replies, deflecting her apology, focusing more on getting the wound treated. Oh, the wound, I forgot about that. Don't be too worried, I can't really feel it anyways. Yor says while slightly shaking her hand trying to lessen his worry. This action only causes him to panic a bit more due to how she was making it harder for him to run it under cold water. Meanwhile, in Yor's mind, she's lamenting at how she forgot that normal people don't have a ridiculously high of a pain tolerance like she does. Their cooking lesson is put on hold for a few minutes while Loid is bandaging Yor's hand. You should be more careful while cooking. There are many opportunities for injury to occur if you're not attentive in the kitchen. He reprimates, maybe he should start teaching Yor how to safely navigate the kitchen before moving on to cooking. Hearing no reply, he continues, Anya would be sad to see you hurt, so start becoming more aware of your actions in the kitchen. In the end, he adds on a bit awkwardly, and so would I. This sentence enacts a reaction out of Yor. She never really thought about Loid worrying about her well-being, or Anya. It makes sense for Anya, she's her mother now and she already lost one. For Loid, due to their current arrangements, it made sense for him to have to worry, however she felt he was implying a bit more. But regardless, it felt nice to have someone other than her brother worrying about her. Right, I don't want to worry you or her, I'll be more careful, she replies. Letting that interaction drop, Loid wonders if they should even continue. Yor might be discouraged from continuing, and he was split between encouraging her and just putting a stop to this for both of their well-being. He could take over everything, but would that really count as teaching her how to cook? I understand if you're rethinking the idea of teaching me how to cook, but please, I really want to learn from you. Yor pleads, having realized what Loid's silence meant. Seeing the look in her eye, Loid can't bring himself to let words of rejection exit his mouth. He really needs to start brushing up on his rejection and deception skills. If he isn't careful, he's going to become as useful as a blunt knife. Pushing those thoughts aside, he checks her bandages once again, then nods his head and leads Yor back to the kitchen. Getting a new pan out, this time Loid pours the oil. Now that the oil has been poured, we need to spread it out by moving the pan. Come over here and I'll guide you. Yor's hand extends towards him. He pulls her over slightly and guides her hand towards the pan to grip it. Thanks to Loid's guidance, there is no spillage while spreading the oil. It was a wonder how they were only on the first step of the recipe and so many problems had already occurred. The next step is to place the fish onto the pan. Be careful not to touch the pan while placing it, and don't drop it too far from the pan or the oil's going to splash up. Loid instructs. He makes sure to be very detailed with his instructions. He didn't want Yor to do something that would result in another oil burn. Picking up the fish, she approaches the pan and drops straight in, some oil flying up, but it wasn't terrible. Happy that she didn't burn herself, he moves on to the next step. Yor cooks the fish with minimal help, only needing prompting to flip the fish but not needing help in flipping it. With all the ingredients prepared properly, we can finally get into the main recipe. Loid says he's quite impressed they had gotten through all that in less than an hour. He thought it would take at least a few tries to get the fish looking edible. While instructing Yor to pour the panko breadcrumbs into a bowl, he sets out another large bowl and places the fish and potato inside it. Now we need to mash the fish and potatoes together. He continues while moving towards the cupboards to get out the masher, then hands it to her. Do I just press it down over and over again? Yor asks, while inspecting the masher she was given. Not hard enough to break the bowl, but yes, just press it really quickly to mash it. Loid says cautiously, hoping that the bowl isn't going to be broken. As soon as he says that, Yor's hand is suddenly a blur and the sounds of mashed up fish and potato fill the room. The inhumane speed would have shocked him if he hadn't been living with her for the past few months. Within a few minutes, everything is already finely combined together. Yor was going to continue but was stopped by Loid's rushed, okay, that's enough. Staring down at the bowl, he's glad he stopped her because the potatoes and fish were already quite smooth and airy. He didn't know what would happen if she were to have continued. You can now add in all the ingredients we prepared before alongside 2 tablespoons of milk, 1 tablespoon of mustard, 2 eggs, salt and pepper. Loid droned out like he's reading off a recipe in front of him. Putting all the ingredients in had been quite uneventful until they got to the eggs. Yor's attempt at cracking them had been less than successful. There were egg shells everywhere and it took a painstakingly long time for Loid to pick all of them out. Then another few minutes spent comforting a defeated Yor looking at the cracked eggshells. He decides to crack the second egg to prevent that from happening again. Yor proved to be quite efficient at stirring and mixing things together. Finally finding something which allows her to use a decent amount of strength but not being in danger of ruining the meal. After mixing everything together, it was time to roll them into balls and coat them with panko breadcrumbs. You make rolling and coating these look so easy. Yor exclaims wonder clear in her voice as she looks at the fish cakes she had rolled into balls compared to the one Loid had made to demonstrate. Her ones were completely deflated and the panko breadcrumbs were falling off while his example one was completely round and pristinely coated. Loid wanted to reply something along the lines of, "Maybe it's because you're not rolling the balls but compressing them together more." But deciding against it, he didn't want to kill her spirit, instead opting with saying, "It just comes with practice." After repeating the process a few more times, they transfer them to the fridge for 30 minutes to help keep them in shape. It was finally time to fry them. Loid was not looking forward to the flying part at all. After the disaster that was frying the fish, he couldn't imagine frying 5 fish cakes at once could end well. But they had already come this far, there wasn't really a point in stopping now. "Loid, could you please put the oil in? I don't want to accidentally burn you, or myself." Yor pleads. A look of pure defeat appears on her face as she stares at the bottle of oil. "You need to learn to pour oil eventually. How about I show you the motion with the closed bottle?" he suggests, once again grabbing her hand and placing it in his to show the wrist movement. This strategy would have worked, if not for Yor focusing on the physical contact instead of the technique. She ended up with another oil burn on her hands. After another break while she ran her hand under cold water, they started again. "Loid, the fish cakes are, melting into the pan," Yor says while he was on the other side of the kitchen getting a plate that they could place all the fish cakes on. "It's only been 2 minutes, how could they be?" Staring at the pan, he sees that all the fish cakes are not melting but burning in the pan. The smell of ash already filling the air. Immediately turning the fire off, Loid notices that it was on high heat instead of medium. Why was the fire turned up to the highest setting when it was set on medium before? Loid questions, although he thinks he already can guess what Yor did. "I thought if we turned the fire up, it would make the fish cakes cook at a faster rate. It's what I did when I wanted to cook Yuri's meals faster," she replies with a confused and disappointed look on her face as she casts her eyes towards the burnt fish cakes on the pan. Not for the first time, Loid feels immense pity and respect for Yuri. Pity at him for having to live off of Yor's cooking throughout his childhood, but respect for being able to survive through to adulthood on such a diet. "Well, for the next batch, please do not touch the dials at all. Turning on maximum heat will only end up burning them," he replies, slightly exasperated. He's sure he's met children who showed more common sense in the kitchen than Yor. Even Anya isn't this bad. "So that's why most of the meals I cooked for Yuri ended up being charcoal black," she said thoughtfully. Loid wonders if it was even possible to teach her to be capable in the kitchen. Despite his best efforts, he's been trying a lot to make this go well, hasn't he? The second batch of fish cakes also ended up a little bit burnt. However, they looked edible, and that was more than most of Yor's creations could say for themselves. While thinking about what he could have done better, he suddenly feels something against his lips. He sees Yor's excited face in front of him holding one of the fish cakes to his mouth. "Try it, Loid. It's the fruits of your efforts as much as mine," she says, clearly wanting to see how he thought it tasted. Although slightly cautious, he's sure it wouldn't taste too bad. Worse comes to worse, he just spends another afternoon on the toilet. Taking the fish cake out of Yor's hand, he's met with a delightful surprise. It actually tastes quite good. Despite having a slight burnt taste, the fish and potatoes inside were still soft and rich. Combining it with the increased crunch on the outside, The combo was quite nice texture-wise. Seeing how he didn't immediately make a disgusted face, Yor lets out a happy cheer. Then suddenly engulfed Loid in a hug. "Thank you so much again. This really means a lot to me, thank you." There's something different about the tone of her voice. It didn't carry the usual bounce her normal voice did. This tone sounds like something more private, more vulnerable. Due to the nature of his occupation, he's never in the limelight, never had anyone to thank him. He shouldn't get used to this, but it felt warm, having someone thanking him for small things. "You're welcome, Yor," Loid replies, his tone unfamiliar to even himself. He who always has his emotions in check and accounted for. What a day of firsts it has been. We still have some time before Anya comes home. Why don't we move to the living room to eat the pastries you bought and the fish cakes we made? He asks, trying to think of something they could do to fill time. He can't tell if he's suggesting this to get into the role of husband more or because he enjoys this new life he has. The idea of him genuinely enjoying this new life doesn't enact as much fear as he thought it would. All he feels is contentment. They spend the rest of the afternoon laying on the couch, idle chatter filling the air of the living room. After an hour or so of talking, they settle into a comfortable silence, with the television acting as background noise. Loid notices Yor's eyes starting to droop after a while and is about to suggest her to go take a nap. However, looking down at her figure slumped against his, with her head leaning on his shoulder, he realizes she's already asleep. Any and all thoughts of saying anything to disturb the peaceful state that Yor is in right now immediately leave his mind. The slow, steady up and down movement of her chest and the serene expression of her face remind Loid that he's never seen Yor completely relaxed. He's noticed that she always has her guard up even if it isn't noticeable to the untrained eye. Regardless of what she's doing, her posture and way she holds herself allows her to shift into the offense or defense at the blink of an eye. He never really questioned it, seeing as she grew up having to raise Yuri. Surely there were dangers that came along with it. But the idea that she felt safe and trusted him enough to fall asleep on him spoke leaps and bounds. As a spy, naturally he always had his guard up, and for such a display of vulnerability he wants to cherish it. Even if it wasn't as deep to Yor as it was to him. Half watching the television and half watching Yor, Loid suddenly tumbles down onto the couch by a sudden pressure on his side. Looking down, he sees that Yor wrapping her arms tightly around his torso like he's a stuffed toy. N.U.M. The egg. She mumbles as the arms around his waist get tighter. If Loid wasn't a trained spy with higher-end endurance, he's pretty sure he might have broken a rib by now. The temptation to wake her up so he could breathe properly was strong. However, she looks too peaceful, so she lets her enjoy her dream about cooking. Reaching over to the coffee table to click the off button on the remote, he slowly readjusts their position so that Yor's head isn't leaning off on the side, instead on his chest. His hands now resting on her head and torso. It's only because the position she was in would have caused neck problems when she woke up. Yeah, just because of that. The sound of Yor's breathing eventually pulls him into the land of dreams, fleetingly. He wonders when he started losing his touch so much that he would fall asleep out in the open. When Anya comes home, she's met with the sight of both her parents holding each other sleeping soundly. Yor's head in the crook of Loid's neck as his arms are wrapped around her torso. They look like a real couple who had fallen asleep on each other after a quiet day together. Looking at the scene before her, she decides not to disturb them. She's really happy that her parents finally had some real quality time together. Not wanting to linger any longer, fearing their instincts would wake them up once they sensed someone else was in the room. Anya grabs some of the pastries and food on the table before escaping to her room where Bond was. Once she closes the door behind her, she puts one of the fish cakes in her mouth. Wow, Mama actually made something that tasted good. Unfortunately, this one shot is over. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time around.